Welcome, everybody. This is Tuesday Morning Grind, episode number 29. Today we have Daniel Solove with us. Daniel is the CEO of Teach Privacy, research professor at George Washington University Law School, holds a JD from Yale Law School, and you've written countless papers that I've really enjoyed reading over the years. Thank you very much for being here, and thank you for everything you've done with privacy.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome. So one thing that I've always wanted to ask you, kind of starting off, is you're I don't know if you would consider this, but at least part of your life's work has been like this whole domain of privacy, which is more and more important to us. Like, what drives you to do that? Are there things that you're seeing that concern you? What's your driver behind this being your life's work?
Well, I got interested in this in law school in the mid-90s. There was a cyber law course taught for the very first time at the law school, and I was really fascinated by the issues. At that point, the internet was very new, and I thought it was really here to stay. And the questions it raised were really fascinating. And one area that I thought I'd start in was privacy. And I thought I'd be a general internet law person. But privacy turned out to be a really big rabbit hole. And so as I thought, like, okay, I'll just, research and write a paper or two. But it happened that as I finished one, there were 50 more questions and all sorts of developments that started to happen. And even before the ink had dried on the first paper I wrote, I had just a paper draft, everyone starts calling me an expert in privacy. And I thought this was a little ridiculous. I hadn't even taught a year. The paper wasn't even published. So I realized, hey, this is kind of good. This is neat. It's nice to be called an expert just as I'm starting my career. And I was called that because there really were hardly anyone, there's hardly anyone else out there. So I learned, like, hey, my bread is buttered here and I can fake it until I make it. And then there were so many new laws and new developments and new cases and issues in the media. And there was just this endless supply of stuff. So it's kind of like the gold rush. You go out there and you see, oh my gosh, you can't stop because you keep finding gold. So ultimately, I never got to the other issues in cyber law. And this field was this gigantic rabbit hole that I've never gotten out of. But what's exciting is there's always something new, always something happening, always a bunch of new issues, whether it be AI and dark patterns that are being talked about today, new laws that are constantly being enacted. Just last week, Colorado was the latest, and then we had new word from Europe on the standard contractual clauses, and then a bunch of other very big stories coming out, big developments. So it really is never ending, and so that's what's kept me in the game, is that the game keeps getting bigger and bigger and with more stuff to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. I know you recently did some research on, I wrote a paper on privacy harms, which I think is probably the most cited thing in recent history for me. People always say, hey, did you see Solove's thing on privacy harms? So that's got to be a little bit gratifying. But when you think about privacy and like the implications in society, would you consider yourself an optimist, or are you deeply concerned about where we're headed?
Well, I would say a little both. It depends on what day or what moment you catch me in. On my cynical side, I kind of think that we're kind of doomed, and if we by the time we figure out privacy for today, there'll be a whole host of new issues of privacy for tomorrow, and then at that point, the AI robots will kill us, and if they don't kill us, we're going to destroy the planet with global warming. That's my cynical side. So basically, on one side, it's like we're rearranging deck chairs, we're doomed. My optimist side, when I'm feeling optimistic or want to cheer myself up, I say, look, when I look back, 20 years ago, and see all the developments that have happened in the law and in privacy to respond to the issue, it's pretty dramatic. something like around close to 150 countries around the world now have a comprehensive privacy law. We have the GDPR. Every year, many, many more countries join with privacy laws. We have all these laws by the states. The types of protections for privacy are growing. You ask someone what would be in a comprehensive privacy law circa 2000 when the debate started happening. At that point, everyone was opposed. Industry vehemently opposed to a comprehensive privacy law, federal privacy law in the United States. Now, actually, it's interesting. I think a lot of industry wants a federal privacy law. And if you looked back in 2000s of what would that law contain, it probably wouldn't have had a right to delete, which now is almost going to be a standard thing, or a right to data portability, or a lot of the other types of things that we're seeing in privacy laws just wouldn't have been there. We also have a privacy profession. Most companies now have privacy officers, at least companies of a decent size. And that was not the case back 20 years ago. And these internal folks, sometimes internal teams, are doing a lot with regard to regulating privacy internally and helping to protect companies and stop them from doing problematic things, internally. We also see now emerging in the laws regulation of dark patterns, which are manipulative user interfaces, deceptive user interfaces. This is something that, go back 10 years or so, would have been unheard of for laws to touch. Typically the mantra was, if there's, the regulators should stay away from, meddling in any kind of technological development. Hands off, legislatures don't know better than the engineers. But now with the dark patterns regulation, which we're seeing in California's law and some other bills, this is becoming more accepted and standard, I think, and it's going to be a feature in a lot of new emerging privacy laws in the future. So,
what is the dark patterns, Daniel? I don't think I'm up to speed on that. What is that?
Basically, it's a term to capture a manipulative user interface, and these are ways that an interface will make it hard for people to exercise their privacy choices. So it might be a very ambiguous way to opt out of something, or something that will say, hey, do you accept cookies? And there's only an accept button. And it's really hard to figure out how you reject them.
Interesting.
Or things that will make you, okay, here are the privacy settings, but they're really hard to find. And then if you really want to use them, it takes a lot of work to do it. Or, and in an email, like the unsubscribe button is it's hidden, it's really hard to find. Or if you want to close your account, you can't really find it in the menus. All these are dark patterns, the things designed to make it difficult for people to make the choice for their privacy, or to trick them, or to otherwise try to inhibit them from exercising those choices. And increasingly laws are cracking down, saying, hey, this is bad. You really shouldn't make these designs because you are thwarting people's expectations, you're confusing people, you're making it difficult for them to exercise their preferences.
Interesting. Yeah, I've always wondered how we would address like the surveys, the infamous Facebook survey that you take and then all of a sudden it gives data to the app developers. So it seems like something like this would be a good piece of legislation to address some of that stuff. Awesome. One thing that I talk a lot of people about is there seems to be a consensus that one of the ways to help privacy move along is through education and teaching folks, which you've spent a career doing. In the classroom, how has your class evolved? Are you seeing like a ton of interest in students taking your class or asking different types of questions, maturing their thoughts around privacy? How is that going?
Yeah, it's going great. I think ever since I started teaching the course, which was back in 2000, so it's been 21 years now, and I've taught it every year. I've had strong student interest. I think recently, student interest has been even stronger. I've had as many as 80 students sign up for the course in a given semester. I think ultimately there should be many courses in privacy. Privacy is like intellectual property is, which is that, in that area, there are many courses. There's copyright, there's patents, there's trademarks, there's a general IP course, there's sometimes international IP. There's about 4 or 5 different courses in this. Privacy still, if you look at law schools across the country, a majority of schools don't have a course, which I think is outrageous these days. And of those that do, they typically have 1 course, maybe 2 courses. I think there should be at least 4 or 5 courses. The field is booming. There's a lot of demand for privacy lawyers, both in-house as well as at law firms. The law firm practices in privacy are very big. Almost all of the big law firms have a big privacy practice with sometimes 30 to 50, 60 lawyers, sometimes even more than that. There are government agencies that have folks in privacy associations and so on. It's just, it's really, I think, a very, it's still growing very rapidly. And so I'd like to see a more robust curriculum in law schools. I think the demand is there. And I hope that law schools will be more responsive to that demand.
Yeah, absolutely. I see a lot of demand in terms of consulting work where organizations want to, navigate a specific piece of legislation, or they want to build in privacy concepts in their engineering or applications. What about ethics? Are you seeing any demand in like the kind of consulting you do or the conversations that you have where there's an appetite for maybe business leader to consider the ethical implications of privacy outside just the regulatory part of it?
I think at some of the larger companies, yes. At the smaller ones, the startups, not as much. Yeah. They tend to be, really focused on, growing, surviving. They tend to start to think about privacy when they have become established and they have something to lose. There are some startups that are all about, privacy enhancing technologies or ways to create privacy technologies, the privacy tech industry. And they are obviously a different group, but just the general companies that are doing stuff, typically once they reach a certain size, will start to become concerned. And it's usually regulator driven. I mean, I think that, it'd be nice to think that, ethics drives everything, but it typically doesn't. It typically takes a law where you start to see, companies start to really take it seriously. Obviously, I think once you have a company that builds a program and starts having personnel that focus on privacy and care about privacy, the privacy team, especially the privacy officer, is typically a privacy advocate. They do work for the company, and they do have to take into account, the company's needs and desires for profit. But on the other hand, they also, part of their role is to advocate for privacy, to think about the consumers and think about the ethical implications of things. And so the more resources they have, the more attention they get from the upper management, the more that the upper management is going to become aware of, or that the privacy officer can start raising things that are beyond just the 4 corners of complying with the law. And when that happens, then you really start to get a culture of caring about these issues, caring about privacy, not just wanting to do the bare minimum to satisfy the regulation, but to actually do something more robust. And so I think that that's at a level of maturity that you see in some programs, but there are a lot that are still, relatively immature. They're just, okay, we suddenly, have something to lose now, and we better start doing something here. So let's comply, and that's what they'll start. And then over time, I think they'll evolve to a point where they really want to be more proactive and more of a leader in this.
Yeah, coming back to the cynical view, some days I wake up and I'm a little worried because it's so compelling to want to have information asymmetry in terms of the data that big companies can gather on you and in turn monetize. And the same goes for government. There's surveillance programs and there's major advantages from a competition perspective to be able to gather data on citizens. So I always wonder, do you see any check on that? Like globally, society, like from society, like what is the check against all of the appetite to gobble up consumers' information and use it?
Well, I think we are seeing a bit of the pendulum is swinging. I mean, there was after 9/11 on the government surveillance side, you had people were very scared. They were willing to let the government do almost anything it wanted. But over time, people's attitudes snapped back, and the pendulum swung back, and we had very different reactions when the Snowden revelations happened in 2013. Most people were really upset about what the government was doing, and I think that attitudes toward government surveillance are have shifted back and are very different. So that's good, and I think we're going to see more reforms over time as we realize that this is a problem. And actually, the recent thing that just happened in the U.S. now, where the Trump administration went and subpoenaed information about folks in Congress. If anything gets Congress to act, it's when something happens to them. And that brings an issue right to their attention. Hey, wait a second, these laws might not be strict enough, might not be protective enough. We need more checks against what the government can do with surveillance. So a lot of work has to be done there, but I think in the public, the pendulum has swung back, and people want control on government surveillance. And the same thing goes with consumer privacy. What we saw in California with the referendum, the California legislature passed the California Consumer Privacy Act, the CCPA, back in 2018, because there was a referendum on the ballot that was very likely to pass. And they passed this law to basically, get the referendum dropped and the law to substitute for that. And then ultimately the law wasn't strict enough, so the person who did the referendum, Alistair McTaggart, put the referendum back on. That's the California the California Privacy Rights Act, the CPRA, and this passed just last year. He could have almost put anything on that referendum, and it would have passed, because people are very concerned. They do not think that the law protects their privacy with regard to what companies are doing well enough. And so there's a backlash. And we're going to see this in many other states are going to start to pass the privacy laws. People want something done. And if, and I've always said to industry, you can put your head in the sand and deny it and try to ignore it and hope that, the laws aren't going to be passed, or try to create like really weak, meaningless laws. But ultimately, the key is you're going to have to solve these concerns. And if you don't solve people's concerns, laws are going to continue to get passed. So, you can keep forestalling the problem, but eventually what you're going to get is a situation where it's going to be a blank check. And that's what McTaggart had, a blank check. Companies should be thanking their lucky stars, because he could have put anything in the bill. He could have shut down the entire internet industry, and it could have been shut it down. People would have voted yes. Yeah. So
I don't think anyone's going to vote for less privacy right now.
Yeah, I mean, whatever it would have been in there, it wouldn't have mattered. It would have passed. So that's the ultimate thing I think companies need to realize. Putting something weak and ineffective and trying to do something hollow and trying to paste over the problem with some BS type of regulation is not going to work for very long. And at the end of the day, you either meaningfully regulate this, and then the concerns will go away. And until the concerns go away, you haven't solved the problem. And that, I think, we're seeing more and more as people realize, hey, if we raise up our voices and say we don't like this situation, we're concerned about it, and what you're doing now is not addressing it, and the existing law is not addressing it, we're going to see more and more laws passed. And after this round, and companies are, oh my gosh, we don't want 50 state laws or all these different laws. Well, they're going to get those laws, and you're going to keep getting laws until you've figured out how to address these concerns. So I think we're seeing, the pendulum swinging here. And,
Yeah.
I think that, the, the response, I think industry needs to really take a look in the mirror and think about, the larger picture, staving this off by, weakening these laws and fighting these little battles. It doesn't seem like, to me, the wise approach. The wise approach is, why don't you get to a position where people are content with the situation so that there isn't the desire to pass these laws?
Yeah, absolutely. One thing I like to think about is, as a privacy professional, you're probably more cognizant of the privacy ecosystem than the average Joe. How does that impact your day-to-day in terms of your own privacy personal operating system, the cell phones you use, the apps you use, things like that? Are you fairly cognizant of it, or do you think that you just kind of go about pretty much like a normal person?
I go pretty much as a normal person because, I've done work and I've written about this. I think that a lot of the measures that people are given to do to protect their privacy are, I think, relatively meaningless. And so I tend to think that, that there's not a lot worth my doing, quite honestly. That doesn't mean I don't care about privacy. I really do. And I think there should be greater protections. But I think a lot of this can't really be done by putting the burden on the individual. So it's really hard for an individual, including myself, to really evaluate the risk of certain technologies. I know it could potentially happen, but it's really hard to actually make the evaluation. Because when you give out information, let's say, should you give out, your location, where you're going to a vacation, or the fact that you've read this book that you really like? Should you, click like or 5 stars on a movie and put it on Facebook? And you might think, okay, it doesn't seem that bad, right? Okay, I'm disclosing that I really liked, like this new Netflix series. Okay, I'm not embarrassed about that. I'm happy to share that information, and I make the calculation based on that. But but that's not how big data works. That's not how privacy works. This can then be used and combined with other pieces of information that are equally innocuous. But that collective amount of information over a period of time starts to be revealing about me and starts to say things about me that I might not want to be said, or make judgments about me based on an algorithm that I might not like that decision. But it's really hard for me to make that assessment right now when I make that decision to disclose the information. I haven't recalled all these different times I've shared the data, or all the data I might share in the future. And then it also depends on the algorithms use information that other people do. So if you say, oh, let's have transparency, let the companies tell you, what the algorithm does. Well, I still can't figure out what decisions it's going to make about me until I know all the other data from all the other people, because the algorithms will look for patterns. It looks for what you do and for what someone else does and all these different people. And then it says, well, if they do similar things as I do, but like there's another book or movie or something else that they've watched but I haven't watched, the algorithm is going to say, I'm going to like that. It's going to make predictions and judgments about what I might do. But so really to understand that, some of these laws say, hey, you can get a list of all the information that a company has about you. That's nice, but like, why would I waste my time? That doesn't tell me anything. What I really need to know is all the information that it has about everyone. Then I need to know, well, how does the algorithm work? Then I need to be able to run my own version of the algorithm to kind of see what decisions it's going to make about me at any point in time, whether those decisions are going to be harmful or not in the future. And then I can actually make my cost-benefit analysis about sharing the data. In other words, it's practically impossible for an individual to do. And I think ultimately the law tends to put a lot of on the individual. And then if something bad happens, well, you could have, gotten all your information, and you could have, opted out of all this stuff, and you could have done whatever. Well, I don't have time to opt out of, 1,000 different companies. There's a lot of companies that have my data. I can't even keep track. I don't have time to manage this all the time. And I kind of think at the end of the day, it's really hard for individuals to manage their privacy at more than just a few sites. I mean, it might be, okay, I can manage my privacy at Facebook, but I can't do it. I can't, it doesn't scale. I can't do it 1,000 times. And the other thing is that, ultimately, I, when I go to a supermarket and I want to buy milk, I don't want to have to go and research, like, okay, what farm did the milk come from? Is this milk safe or isn't it safe? Is it going to kill me? What are the risks and what are the dangers and what could be in this milk? And then I have to go to the meat diner. I have to do the same thing with the meat. I mean, I'd never get out of the supermarket if I have to research every piece of food I buy or every product I buy. I just like to know that someone has looked at it, figured out what's safe and not, and I can be pretty assured that when I buy my milk and I buy it, someone's looked at it, made sure it's safe, and I can buy it and not worry about it. I have to think about it. Just like I don't have to go and, do research on, okay, do I have to research, each individual pilot that flies my plane and research each plane, and I just know someone's taking care of it. And I think the same thing with privacy. It's just too complicated for an individual to do all this work.
Yep. Do you think we'll shift to something like you look on the back of a food carton, there's some, ingredients, you have movies that have ratings, there's some cheat sheets for us, or someone's just handling it. Do you think that we'll switch, like I think Apple's kind of working on something like this, they're doing kind of the privacy controls. Do you think we'll start moving to something like that, or do you think it'll just, the regulations will get significant enough where we'll gain some confidence?
I mean, the label could be somewhat helpful, but it's limited in what you can do. At the end of the day, it's limited. I think like sometimes you just need hard lines about like what you can and can't do with certain things. And I have, my lights are on I can control my lights on my iPhone, and I like it. It's great. I love it. There are risks, obviously, with that, but I don't want to not use it because of the risks. There are risks with everything that you do. The internet. If you really want to be private, live in a hut in the mountains, because anything you do these days, there's a risk, and it's very hard for an individual to really control the risk, or even see the labels and even make meaningful choices about things. Because you can have like a label. What's it going to say about security, right? It's going to say we have reasonable security. Well, what the heck does that mean? I mean, yep. I kind of need to know, okay, tell me how you train your workforce, because I need to know how they're, how good are they? To tell me what kind of encryption you use. Tell me a lot of different things. You have to be a security expert to really assess if their security is any good. And I kind of think like the average consumer just can't do that. And anything you would say about your security is not meaningful. You kind of need a body that looks at it and sets a standard. Same thing with like my milk. I just want to know that someone's looked at it and it meets a standard, and I'm good with that standard. That's what I think where we kind of need to go.
Yeah, I kind of liken this to financial audits a bit, and that the thing that changed the game was Sarbanes-Oxley back in the day on the financial audit stuff, and it added a lot of enforcement. And then I see all these regulations coming out for security and privacy, which is good in many aspects, but I would argue in most situations a lack of enforcement. Do you see an appetite for enforcement coming down the pipeline at all?
Well, I think enforcement has always been weak. The U.S. actually has had I think pretty good enforcement as countries go. When you look at a lot of countries around the world, enforcement is actually really poor. There's some countries that have passed a comprehensive privacy law, but they haven't even formed the enforcement body yet. So it's kind of like you take it seriously enough to pass a law, but you didn't even bother to form anyone to actually enforce the law. We have a number of agencies in the United States that enforce the law, and I think they do well given what resources they have. But it's kind of like enforcement is on the roadways, right? For every speeder caught, there's 100 more that are not caught. And that same thing with enforcement. You really have a few cases out of the whole where someone gets nabbed. by the enforcer. And that's always been a problem. We just don't have the resources to have a robust enforcement where most offenders are getting caught.
It's
And
also extremely gray in privacy. It seems like if you're speeding, you're going over the speed limit. With privacy, it takes a certain amount of know-how to make an assessment whether someone was really violating the law or being egregious, which further complicates it. It's a tough area.
yeah, I mean, a lot of the enforcement cases you'll see are very clear cut. They're egregious violations, and the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, has brought a number of cases. And if you look at those cases over the last 20 years, they brought maybe a couple hundred, which is not a lot, like 10 cases a year.
Yeah.
But those are egregious. And actually, every household name company is there. Every internet company you can kind of think of, every tech company you can think of, Google, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter. Everybody has a violation. If you read these cases, what they did is not like it's ambiguous. It's a clear-cut, flagrant problem. And, so we're not even enforcing against the gray cases. We're doing the really clear ones. And even then, they're missing a lot of cases that are out there. But at least we enforce against the flagrant ones. Enforcement of the GDPR in the EU, I think is, they're enforcing it and they're seemingly happy about how they're enforcing it. I think it's still, pretty minimal when you think of things, and it's the way they set it up is that countries can choose what country they want to be their enforcer, and they've all gone to one country, namely Ireland, and so most are in Ireland and they're way backlogged, and it's really hard for this one regulator to enforce this gigantic piece of the enforcement pie. So I think they need to think a little bit about how they're going to enforce over there. But I hope that the more enforcement for the laws is there, because a company can just make a calculation to say, look, the likelihood for getting caught, and then if we do get caught, what is going to happen to us? What's the penalty? And for a lot of cases, the penalty is not greater than the benefit they got from making the violation. So a lot of companies say, well, it's very unlikely we get caught. If we do get caught, it's not going to be as bad as what we gain. So what does that tell them to do?
Yep. Yeah, very similar situations with security, right? There's a lot of parallels with what we're seeing in security right now as well. I want to shift gears, talk about a couple of the projects that I'm aware of that you're working on, and I'm sure you're working on many others. So I know you released a book a while back. There was a children's book, The Eyemonger, around privacy. Can you talk a little bit about that? What inspired that? How did you get the idea to write such a book?
Well, I've long wanted to write a book for children about privacy. I have a 10-year-old child, and I think I've read to him every children's book, ever written, probably. And it was, I wanted to read him something about, this is a book about what I do, but I couldn't find anything. Couldn't really find a story to make this come alive. And I realized, I need to do something here to talk about the issue, because there really isn't anything out there. So that inspired me to write the story. The story is about this creature person who has 103 eyes, and he comes to this town and offers to provide them greater security and watch them all the time. And at first, the town's really excited about this. They think this is going to be great. But then they discover that it's actually not so great after all. And he has these flying eyeballs that spy on people. So it's a fun book. It's designed to kind of be vivid and bring it to life and help children understand what privacy is and why it's valuable and some of the trade-offs that we make about privacy. And so that's why I created it. It was a real fun project to do and something I've been wanting to do really ever since I started reading children's literature to my child.
It has some of the panopticon kind of thinking where you're constantly under surveillance. if you have a kid and they enjoy like slightly creepy things, I think this is a great book, which my kids do. They enjoy the illustrations and things like that. So that's awesome. Also, I know you're the CEO of Teach Privacy, which is exactly what it sounds like. You teach courses on different privacy aspects. How's that going? Who are you teaching privacy to?
Yeah, it's going great. This is our, we're now, I guess, 11 years old. I started this in 2010. The main thing that the company does is it provides privacy training for other organizations, and that would be hospitals. We do their HIPAA training. Schools, we do their FERPA training. We do basic end user data security training. So the bulk of our clients are companies or schools or sometimes government agencies and entities. We've done training for cities, companies all around the world, big Fortune 500 companies in every industry. And this is training to train the average employee to make them understand what privacy is about, what rules they need to follow, how to practice good data security, and basically just generally good practices. And I have about 150 courses because it's very complicated. There's a lot of different privacy laws depending on the industry that you're in and what you're doing. Are you marketing to people? There are laws dealing with when can you email them, and how do you unsubscribe them from emails, and when can you call people? When people say, I don't want to be called anymore, what does that mean, and how do you respond to that? What are the basics about maintaining confidentiality and providing people their health records and providing access and protecting them and keeping them confidential? All those sets of rules need to be taught to the different companies. And when I started this, I found that a lot of the existing training out there had, I think, two shortcomings. One was that a lot of times it wasn't written by a subject matter expert. So I'd look at these courses and think, like, there's so much wrong in this stuff. Like, it's not even accurate. They're not talking about the right laws, and they're not getting the laws right. They're not focusing on the right things. So it didn't seem very good. You need to write it with someone who knows the law. And then the other thing is that a lot of it just wasn't very engaging. It wasn't designed by someone who taught before. And one of the things that I thought I could bring to the table here is that, I teach live classes all the time. And I know that, there's instant feedback. Like, I can tell by looking at people's faces if I'm boring them or not. People will start going to sleep in my class if I'm not entertaining and engaging. And if I'm not clear, I'm going to get barraged by a bunch of questions. And if I'm really bad, they're going to throw apples at me. So I get this instant feedback. And now I take that and translate it to the online environment, thinking, okay, how do I make the same experience online? And it's different online. So I had to learn, okay, how do I make this engaging in this different format? But I'm always thinking pedagogically. How do I teach this? What's important? How do I keep people's time minimal so it respect people's time and understand, like, this is what's possible to learn, and don't overload people with information? And how do I bring this stuff to life and make it fun and interesting and make people care about it? So that's really what I try to do with my courses, and how I distinguish them from other stuff out there, and why I got into this. And it's been great. I have a lot of fun making the courses. I believe if I'm not enjoying making the course, no one's going to enjoy watching the course. And so I definitely want to make sure, like, hey, if I'm building this course, I am really enjoying the creative process to make this course and convey this information.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's great training. That's teachprivacy.org if anyone's interested.
It's .com, actually.
Daniel, thank you very much. .com, teachprivacy.com. Okay, excellent. Daniel, thank you very much for being here, and thank you for everything that you do in the privacy space and educating the world. I think you're probably the most followed privacy Twitter person and LinkedIn a personality, which has some irony to it. But that's awesome that you're spreading the message, and thank you very much for being here and everything you do. If you guys enjoyed this conversation and conversations like this, you can check out Tuesday Morning Grind on our YouTube channel or any podcast app that you like to listen to. Just go to YouTube, search Risk 360, check out our playlist, or iTunes or any other podcast app you like. You can check it out. So thanks
Thanks
again,
for
Daniel.
having me.